The finger of power, when body parts became divine weapons. Hook. Imagine you're kneeling in an altar and staring into a jewel box containing a decaying finger. Not just any finger, the finger that supposedly baptized Jesus. Now imagine warring kings, murderous monks, and entire armies slaughtering each other for the privilege of owning it. Welcome to the divine absurdity of sacred relics, where rotting body parts became passports to heaven, power, and profit. And no, this isn't a horror story. This is Christian history dressed in gold leaf and bloodstained robes. Let's rewind to the 4th century, after Emperor Constantine legalized Christianity with the Edict of Milan. Suddenly, Christianity wasn't just tolerated, it was imperial. Churches exploded across the empire, and with them, a new hunger arose, tangible pieces of holiness. The bodies of saints, previously buried in peace, were exhumed, divided, enshrined, and commercialized. Bones became blessings. Blood became business. From the 4th to the 14th century, relics became spiritual currency. They brought protection in battle, healed diseases, guaranteed salvation, and legitimized rulers. Every noble wanted one. Every church needed one. Every pilgrim paid to see one. Enter the finger of St. John the Baptist, the man who, according to Scripture, baptized Jesus and later got his head served up as a party favor for Salome. Somewhere in the chaos of martyrdom, his finger was preserved, or at least that's what several competing churches claimed. By the High Middle Ages, owning a relic wasn't just about devotion, it was politics. Cities competed viciously. Constantinople had a claim. Antioch swore they had the original. Alexandria flashed theirs during festivals. Genoa paraded one through cobbled streets under banners of gold. Eventually, there were 6 different authentic fingers of St. John the Baptist circulating across Europe. Let's be real. The medieval church was running a divine MLM. Each church had a unique relic, each promising miracles, indulgences, and divine intercession. Want to cure infertility? Kiss the finger. Have a heretic neighbor? Pray before the finger. Want your army to win? Donate, kneel, and bless your sword. These fingers didn't travel light. They were encased in opulent reliquaries, often gold-plated, encrusted with gems, and crafted to resemble entire hands, with the index finger dramatically extended, like a divine compass, always pointed upward or toward the donation box. In Paris, King Louis IX built Sainte-Chapelle not out of piety alone, but as a monument to his growing stash of relics, including the finger of John the Baptist and a crown of thorns. He processed through the streets barefoot, carrying relics in his royal arms, a walking PR campaign for God and monarchy. Meanwhile, Baldwin II, the last Latin emperor of Constantinople, desperate and bankrupt, sold his relics like NFTs in a bear market. In 1247, he shipped the Baptist finger to Louis IX in exchange for cash and political favor. Louis staged a public reception with incense, choirs, and a parade fit for a Caesar. The crowd wept. Merchants sold figurines. The relic had become a medieval Super Bowl halftime show. But wait, the finger's journey doesn't end there. Another fragment, also authenticated, ended up in Topkapi Palace, Istanbul, guarded by Ottoman sultans alongside the Prophet Muhammad's beard and Moses' staff. The Islamic Empire, ever savvy in relic diplomacy, understood their symbolic power, even across faith lines. Still not absurd enough? Picture this. You're a 14th century monk, assigned to finger duty. Every morning, you unlock the sanctum, light incense, chant in Latin, and gently polish a 1,200-year-old piece of decomposing prophet. Once a week, you travel with it on pilgrimage, a velvet box strapped to a donkey, promising miracles in exchange for silver coins. And now, what if it were you? Let's say you die for your faith, beheaded heroically. Centuries later, your index finger is hacked off, bathed in myrrh, gold-plated, and passed from bishop to bishop like a sacred USB stick. Pilgrims line up to press their lips to your bone. Nobles rub it on battle flags. Somewhere, a monk with arthritis massages you with sacred oil, praying you won't fall apart before Lent. Fast forward to today. Jeff Bezos buys Steve Jobs' thumb and mounts it on a titanium pedestal inside an Amazon data center. Employees genuflect before it every Monday to ensure fast shipments. Sounds ludicrous? That's exactly how medieval relics functioned. Only back then, they didn't even need Wi-Fi. Even more ridiculous, popes had issued decrees limiting the distribution of relics because fraud was so rampant. One 13th century bishop lamented that there were enough fragments of the true cross in Europe to rebuild Noah's Ark twice. And behind all of this, money. Churches with relics became destinations. Pilgrimages brought wealth. Donations poured in. Markets thrived around holy sites. Fake relic peddlers roamed like spiritual snake oil salesmen, hawking Mary's hair, Christ's baby teeth, and yes, multiple holy foreskins. So next time you see a glowing box behind bulletproof glass in a cathedral, remember, it might not just be a piece of a saint. It might be a lie wrapped in gold, sold for power, kissed for hope, and fought over like a medieval IPO. If this grotesque journey through sacred absurdity tickled your brain, follow the channel, drop a comment, share with a friend who loves weird history, and of course, smash that like button. Blood in the chalice, the Holy Grail's trail of bloodshed. Hook, what if the most sacred cup in history, the one said to have caught Christ's blood, was just medieval fanfiction with a body count? The Holy Grail. Two words that conjure images of sacred quests, divine light, and maybe Monty Python galloping on coconuts. But behind the myth lies a grim tale of wars, executions, political manipulation, and enough fake grails to stock a medieval home goods. Welcome to the unholy history of the Holy Grail. Let's clear the ecclesiastical fog. The Bible never mentions a Holy Grail. The notion that Jesus' chalice survived the Last Supper and collected his blood during the crucifixion? Pure medieval myth-making. Turbocharged by poetry, propaganda, and papal politics. It all began in the 12th century with French poet Chrétien de Troyes, whose unfinished romance Perceval planted the seed. Then came Robert de Boron, who went full cinematic universe. Suddenly the cup was the same one from the Last Supper and had magical powers. Think of them as the George R.R. Martins of their time, except their stories ended in crusades and not Reddit threads. Their words took root in a Europe already high on relic fever. Kings and knights, monks and mystics, everyone wanted a piece of the divine. And the Grail wasn't just a story anymore. It became a goal, a crusade, a spiritual compass pointing to profit and power. By the time the Third Crusade rolled around, rumors of holy objects buried in Jerusalem fueled entire expeditions. Grail fever became relic fever, and the Holy Land became less about spiritual renewal and more about looting churches and ransacking tombs. Crusaders stormed cities, desecrated sanctuaries, and shipped relics back to Europe like tourists on a blood-soaked shopping spree. Enter the Knights Templar, the elite military monastic order with deep pockets and deeper secrets. They set up banking systems, managed real estate, and allegedly, keyword, allegedly, found the Holy Grail hidden beneath the ruins of Solomon's temple. Or maybe they found a soup bowl. Who knows? What mattered was the myth, and that myth gave them immense symbolic power, which made them dangerous. In 1307, King Philip IV of France, owing the Templars a fortune, decided enough was enough. He launched a full-scale purge, arresting Templar leaders, torturing them into confessions, and burning them alive. Among the more mysterious charges, idolatry, blasphemy, and possession of heretical relics. Some whispered they were protectors of the Grail, and that Philip wanted it silenced. Meanwhile, Europe couldn't get enough of its own versions. In Valencia, Spain, the Santo Cáliz, a polished agate cup, sits enshrined, claimed to be the very Grail. It was used by Pope Benedict XVI during Mass in 2006, no less. But don't worry. If you missed that one, you can find at least 6 other churches across Europe with their own authentic Grails, all with provenance shakier than a medieval bridge. Some of these chalices had bizarre pilgrim rituals. In medieval England, one supposed Grail was dunked in wine and passed around for healing. In parts of France, pilgrims were allowed to sip from the relic for fertility. One Grail in Bavaria had its own choir. But let's get personal. Imagine you're that cup. You started as a humble earthenware vessel, made by a tired craftsman in a Galilean village. You served flatbread and wine at a quiet dinner. Then came the blood, the chaos, the crucifixion. Suddenly you're sacred. You're smuggled in secret, paraded before kings, stolen in sieges, split into replicas, dipped in gold, and kissed by thousands of feverish lips. And now you rest behind bulletproof glass, guarded by laser alarms and Vatican-curated lighting. You were just a cup. You didn't ask for any of this. Fast forward. Imagine a cracked coffee mug used by Mr. Rogers. Then picture it resurfacing in 2400. World leaders declare it a source of universal peace. Nations go to war over ownership. Jeff Bezos builds a neo-cathedral around in space. Elon Musk drinks kombucha from it during a Mars livestream. Meanwhile, some AI pope declares it sacred and grants indulgences for NFTs of the mug. Absurd? Of course. But not more absurd than medieval Europe's fixation with a cup that might never have existed in the first place. Because the Grail was never just about the object. It was about what it allowed people to do, to claim power, justify conquest, sanctify violence, and sell salvation. Behind every miracle was a motive. Behind every relic was a transaction. The Holy Grail wasn't a vessel for blood. It was a vessel for ambition. So next time someone waxes poetic about noble quests and spiritual relics, remember, that sacred cup you're picturing? It might just be a medieval scam artist's best work, the original multi-level marketing chalice. If this truth-filled sip of irony quench your thirst for heretical history, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment, share with a relic-hunting friend. And don't forget to smash that like button like a heretic facing the Inquisition. The Cross Conspiracy, how the true cross sparked empires and executions. Hook, what if I told you that the cross where Jesus died didn't just bear a man? It bore centuries of war, lies, and political gold mines. You know the image. A simple wooden cross, soaked in blood, raised under a darkened sky. Sacred, humble, untouchable. Now imagine that same cross being chopped into bits, sold by popes, fought over by monarchs, and used to crown kings and kill heretics. Welcome to the divine hustle of the true cross, the world's holiest lumberyard. Let's rewind to the early 4th century. Christianity was transitioning from a persecuted sect to the spiritual backbone of a growing empire. Constantine had just issued the Edict of Milan, legalizing the faith, and his mother, Empress Helena, took on a divine scavenger hunt. She traveled to Jerusalem, not for sightseeing, but to locate the most sacred object in Christian memory, the very cross upon which Jesus was crucified. According to legend, and let's emphasize legend, she found not only the true cross, but the crosses of the 2 thieves as well. 3 decomposing logs buried beneath a pagan temple. Archaeology? Not quite. Religious theater? Absolutely. The story goes that Helena tested each cross on a dying woman. 2 had no effect. The 3rd healed her instantly. Bingo. Divine endorsement. Whether miracle or marketing, the effect was clear. Helena returned with holy wood and imperial legitimacy. Helena didn't just preserve the cross. She strategically fragmented it. Pieces were sent to Constantinople, Rome, Antioch, and beyond, each encased in gilded reliquaries, paraded through cities and venerated by masses. These weren't devotional gestures. They were power plays. In an era when empires rose and fell by divine favor, the true cross became a tool of control. By the 9th and 10th centuries, relics of the cross had become symbols of national identity. Charlemagne reportedly carried a splinter into battle, believing it guaranteed victory. Louis the Pious enshrined as an Aachen, turning the city into a pilgrimage hotspot. Richard the Lionheart, ever the theatrical crusader, traveled with his own relic, a spiritual passport to heaven and a PR weapon against Saladin. Rivalries flared. Venice accused Constantinople of hoarding the most authentic piece. Jerusalem claimed exclusivity until Saladin's conquest. France tried to outshine Rome by parading longer crossbeams through Paris. At one point, 3 rival cathedrals in Italy each claimed to have the original vertical shaft of the cross. Mathematically impossible, but spiritually marketable. And wherever faith goes, fraud follows. By the 13th century, relic merchants were everywhere. Monks doubled as brokers. Pilgrims with pouches full of silver coins were easy prey. Whole churches were constructed around beams of unverified origin. Some clerics even paid carpenters to whittle miraculous fragments from ancient-looking wood. By the Reformation, theologians like John Calvin mockingly observed that all these bits could rebuild Noah's Ark, and maybe even furnish it. In 1187, the Battle of Hattin changed everything. Crusaders marched under the banner of the largest surviving relic of the true cross. When Saladin defeated them, he seized the relic and it vanished into history. Panic erupted across Europe. Papal bulls were issued. Churches rang funeral bells. Kings wept, not just for the lost relic, but for the divine authority it symbolized. New crusades were launched, fueled not by faith, but by the dream of retrieving a holy plank. Some claimed visions, others forged replacements. Still, the cross refused to stay lost, because supply follows demand. Relics resurface in France, in Italy, in remote abbeys. In Spain, a Cistercian monk claimed a splinter bled in his hands. In Poland, a bishop declares fragment wept oil. Meanwhile, the Vatican mostly stayed silent, managing relics like a spiritual central bank. And the miracles? Oh, they multiplied. One relic supposedly cured blindness, but only on Tuesdays. Another made crops flourish if buried under a field during a full moon. Some were known to tremble during Mass. Others simply vanished and reappeared, like a medieval Houdini act, conveniently whenever a bishop needed to boost cathedral attendance. Let's get immersive. Imagine you're in 14th century Cologne. It's Holy Week. The cathedral bells toll. The streets are packed. Incense chokes the air. A procession advances. Bishops in scarlet robes, monks chanting in Latin, children dressed as cherubs. And at the center, a jeweled reliquary opens slowly, revealing a foot-long piece of dark wood. The crowd gasps. People weep. A woman faints. A noble throws his ring into the offering bowl. The bishop raises a fragment above the crowd. And in that moment, no one doubts its authenticity or its utility. Now let's go absurd. Imagine being the cross. You're born a tree in some forgotten grove, chopped down by Roman soldiers, turned into an execution device. You cradle the body of a dying prophet. Then you're discarded like waste. Centuries later, you're exhumed, chopped to bits, dipped in gold, paraded like a trophy and used to anoint kings. You've been kissed by peasants, touched by lepers, and set ablaze in holy wars. You don't know peace. You are never whole again. And today, picture Jeff Bezos discovering a burned piece of Steve Jobs' original garage bench. He declares it holy. Apple consecrates it. Pilgrims arrive with iPhones and incense. Elon Musk builds a replica from Mars colonists. A new cult forms, the Church of the Sacred Circuit. Pilgrims bathe in silicon water. A chapel is 3D printed in Cupertino, because the true cross wasn't just a relic. It was medieval branding, a logo burned into the conscience of civilization, a splinter that could rally armies, legitimize power, and sell indulgences. Behind every display case was a calculation, theological, financial, imperial. So next time you see a fragment labeled Crux Vera, don't just admire the wood, ask who benefits. Because sometimes the biggest miracles in history were made with sawdust and strategy. If the splintered truth made you rethink history, follow the channel, drop a comment, tag a relic junkie, and smash that like button like you're breaking heresy with a hammer. The skull of the saint, when decapitation meant eternal fame. Hook. What if losing your head was the best career move you could make in the Middle Ages? Heads rolled in medieval Europe, quite literally, and some became more powerful after death than they ever were in life. Welcome to the cult of sacred skulls, where severed heads became symbols of divine power, relics of national identity, and tools for manipulation that would make any modern spin doctor weep with envy. Let's start with one of the most famous heads in Christendom, St. John the Baptist, beheaded by order of Herod Antipas. His head allegedly ended up on a silver platter as a grotesque party trick for Salome. But what happened next was pure medieval magic. Multiple cities claimed to possess the actual head. Yes, not just parts of it, the whole thing. According to various traditions, the skull of John the Baptist was kept in Damascus, in Amiens, in Rome, in Montenegro, and even San Silvestro in Capite in Rome, each claiming exclusive authenticity. In Amiens, The arrival of the skull triggered a pilgrimage boom so powerful, it funded the construction of the Grand Amiens Cathedral, now a UNESCO World Heritage Site. But Damascus claimed the relic first. A mosque still holds what's said to be John's skull, in a golden dome inside the Umayyad Mosque, ironically blending Islamic reverence with Christian tradition. Medieval pilgrims were caught in the middle of this theological turf war. Which head was the real one? The answer was simple. Whichever city you were already paying to visit. John wasn't the only decapitated saint to go viral. Enter Saint Denis, the patron saint of Paris. After being beheaded by Roman authorities, Denis supposedly picked up his own head and walked 6 kilometers while preaching repentance. Because in medieval hagiography, a bloody neck stump was no excuse to stop spreading the word. Artists painted him calmly cradling his own severed head like a grotesque handbag. It became so iconic that it defined the visual culture of Paris for centuries. Montmartre, where Denis supposedly stopped, became one of the most sacred and wealthiest sites in France. Monasteries are displayed where they claim were fragments of the skull, while other regions like St. Denis Abbey staked rival claims, drawing in pilgrims and pocketing indulgences. At one point, the skull was allegedly used in coronation rituals of French kings, placing a decapitated head near the living one to symbolically pass divine authority. Nothing says legitimacy like a corpse's approval. Then there's St. Catherine of Siena, who wasn't beheaded, but whose head became the subject of one of the most bizarre relic heists in history. After her death in Rome, Sienese monks decided her cranium would do more good and bring more pilgrims back home. They snuck into the Eternal City, packed her head into a bag, and made for the gates. Legend says Roman guards stopped them, opened the sack, and saw only rose petals. Once safely in Siena, the petals reverted back into her skull. That head remains on display today, inside the Basilica of San Domenico. Glass encased, eerie, and still pulling crowds. These weren't isolated incidents. St. Valentine, multiple skulls. St. Barbara, claimed by at least 3 churches across Europe. A Crusader-era church in Prague even exhibited a row of martyrs' heads, arranged like trophies above the altar, a grim medieval version of a victory wall. Some heads were even split in half, shared between rival churches. One got the jaw, the other got the brain case. Cooperation, medieval style. These skulls weren't just morbid trophies. They were political weapons. Cities fought wars of reputation over them. Monasteries faked documents of authenticity. In Cologne, relics of the 3 magi, including alleged skulls, were so revered that they turned the cathedral into one of the most important pilgrimage sites in Europe. Entire economies were built on bone. Miracles followed. One skull cured blindness. Another allegedly screamed when heretics entered the chapel. In Portugal, a nun's skull supposedly bled during droughts, a divine weather report. In Poland, a fragment of a saint's jaw was said to glow in the presence of sin, prompting entire communities to confess out of sheer paranoia. In Spain, one bishop claimed a martyr's head whispered prophecies. Conveniently, ones that favored the bishop's re-election. Now imagine it's you. You live a life of piety, self-sacrifice, maybe a few miracles. You're executed and your head is sliced clean. Centuries later, your skull is bleached, polished, and displayed like a museum artifact. Strangers kiss your teeth. Children pray to your eye sockets. A bishop uses your cranium as a prop during Mass. And somewhere in Europe, another you is also on display, because, surprise, your head is now a franchise. Fast forward to today. Imagine the embalmed head of Princess Diana, claimed by 5 different royal chapels. One is on tour in a bulletproof Pope Mobile. Another is mounted on the dashboard of a Rolls-Royce shrine. TikTok pilgrims do dances around it. A startup offers pilgrimage NFTs of 3D printed replicas. The Church of St. Diana launches a mobile app. Apple sponsors her holographic mass. Influencers sell Diana Aura Spray. Sounds insane? The Middle Ages did it better. And bloodier. Because back then, owning a head meant owning a narrative. It meant controlling flow of people, of money, of belief. It was marketing with blood and bone, myth-making with jawlines and halos. Behind every skull was a city trying to prove it at God's ear, and maybe his jawbone, too. So next time you see a dusty relic in a cathedral, look closer. That golden mass might hide a severed skull that launched 1,000 pilgrimages, bought a dozen bishops, and paid for centuries of power. If this decapitated tale made your head spin, follow the channel, drop a comment, share with a friend who loves twisted history. And of course, smash that like button like a medieval executioner with a quota. Thorns and thrones, the crown that justified tyranny. Hook, imagine putting on a crown made of thorns. Not to suffer, but to rule. Welcome to the ultimate medieval power flex. Of all the relics that dripped with symbolism and blood, none carried more political weight or absurd theatricality than the crown of thorns. Supposedly the very circle of pain shoved onto Christ's head before his crucifixion, this relic became the headwear of kings, the trophy of empires, and the centerpiece of a geopolitical game of thrones that spanned continents. Let's start at the beginning, or, better said, the beginning of the legend. The Gospels mention that Roman soldiers mocked Jesus with a crown of thorns, but no description is given. Fast forward a few centuries, and suddenly we have not just the thorns, but the exact crown, intact, radiant, and conveniently available for political leverage. It first appears in Christian records in Jerusalem, likely as part of a local cult relic. But by the 6th century, it had supposedly made its way to Constantinople, where Byzantine emperors proudly showed it off to foreign dignitaries. A crown of suffering turned into a diplomatic flex. How ironic! By the 10th century, it was housed in the palace of Bucolion, near the imperial chapel, and protected like a state treasure. Pilgrims and ambassadors were granted brief, dramatic viewings. The emperor would unveil it, often with incense and chanting, as if revealing a divine weapon. Think of it as a spiritual missile silo. But the true theatrical explosion came in the 13th century, when Baldwin II, the last Latin emperor of Constantinople, found himself broke and besieged. What do you do when your empire is collapsing? Sell the crown of thorns? Of course. He offered it to Venice first, but King Louis IX of France outbid everyone. Louis didn't just buy the relic. He bought supremacy. In 1238, he paid an astronomical sum, plus additional bribes and transport costs. He didn't stop there. He built an architectural jewel, Sainte-Chapelle, solely to house a relic. Its stained glass windows told the story of Christian redemption, culminating in the crown's glorification. Louis didn't send a servant. He personally walked barefoot, wearing sackcloth, through the streets of Paris, holding the relic above his head. This wasn't humility. It was a calculated spectacle. Trumpets, bells, bishops weeping, crowds collapsing from ecstasy. The crown wasn't just holy, it was political theater at its finest. But here's the medieval twist. The original crown had no thorns. It was a woven reed circle, now kept at Notre Dame de Paris. The thorns? They were add-ons, distributed, multiplied, sanctified, and sold across Europe. Want to feel closer to Christ? Here's a thorn. Just donate, kiss, pray, repeat. Dozens of cathedrals claimed individual thorns. Some came in gold lockets, others embedded in crucifixes. They appeared in Venice, Cologne, Pisa, London, and even Bruges, where entire processions were staged around a single thorn. Each piece came with elaborate documentation. Most forged, some sealed with wax and papal bulls, others just blessed by a bishop with very ambitious handwriting. These thorns weren't static museum pieces. They toured. Bishops carried them through plague-stricken towns. Nobles passed them over battlefield maps. Entire Holy Weeks revolve around thorn-centric rituals. In Barcelona, a thorn was dipped into olive oil and spread across the forehead of the ruling duke during Mass. In Milan, one was used to crown new bishops, a literal infusion of divine pain into spiritual power. Wars broke out over who had the most authentic thorn. Cities clashed over rights to display them on feast days. In 1311, a diplomatic standoff erupted between Avignon and Florence over the use of a specific thorn in a papal investiture, the church equivalent of arguing over which USB stick holds the true salvation of EXE. Miracles abounded. One thorn allegedly bled during Lent. Another glowed in moonlight. A third cured a noble's plague, conveniently after he donated a vineyard to the church. Popes gave them as favors. Kings used them as moral shields. Clergy used them to whip congregations into rapturous obedience. In some cases, thorns were paraded through cities to stop plagues or hailstorms. One legend from 15th century Hungary claims a thorn pulsed with light during a Turkish invasion, repelling the army. Others were embedded into royal crowns, literally transforming the instruments of torture into badges of power. So what if it were you? Imagine being tortured, mocked, crowned with thorns, and then centuries later, your pain becomes political jewelry, your torment marketed in velvet boxes. Every spike an auction-off relic, each one legitimizing taxes, crusades, and royal propaganda. Your suffering becomes merchandise, the medieval equivalent of turning trauma into luxury branding. Fast forward to now. Gandhi's glasses are found. One lens goes to the UN Peace Shrine. The other ends up in a Qatari investment fund. Elon Musk wears the frames during a Mars livestream. Meanwhile, Etsy sells resin replicas with blessing oil. TikTokers film themselves crying in Gandhi cosplay. Apple announces Vision Thorns, augmented reality glasses that simulate sacrifice. The spiritual industrial complex goes viral, because in the end, the crown of thorns wasn't about memory. It was about manipulating memory, about repackaging pain into glory. In medieval Europe, no one wore that power better or bloodier than a king in a cathedral, bowed before a thorn while plotting a conquest. If this tale of painful politics pierced your mind, hit the follow button, leave a comment, tag a fellow heretic, and stab that like button with the righteous fury of a relic salesman in a recession. The milk of the virgin, when breast milk was bottled and sold. Hook, what if I told you that the holiest liquid in medieval Europe wasn't blood, it was breast milk? Forget swords, nails, and bones. In the height of relic fever, nothing screamed divine intimacy more than the breast milk of the Virgin Mary. Yes, you read that right. For centuries, churches claimed to possess tiny vials, crusty cloths, and alabaster ampullae filled with the literal milk of the Mother of God. It wasn't just revered. It was commercialized, franchised, weaponized, and in many cases, likely fabricated with chalky water and very bold faith. The phenomenon began to explode in the 11th and 12th centuries, right as Marian devotion was hitting its fever pitch. Europe was undergoing a spiritual makeover. Mary became a maternal counterbalance to a stern, judicial Christ. Suddenly, Mary wasn't just the Otoko's God-bearer. She was the ultimate mother, the compassionate intercessor, the queen of heaven with one breast exposed in Gothic art and the other leaking miracles into medieval theology. The logic? If her womb bore God, then her milk nourished him. And if a drop of that milk could survive, well, imagine the miracles. Infertility cured, crops saved, enemies defeated, the faithful blessed. Entire communities saw it as a divine insurance policy. The most famous of these relics resided in Walsingham, England, Cagliari, Sardinia, Dubrovnik, and of course Naples, where an entire vial of thick white liquid was paraded during feast days. In Naples, the liquid would allegedly change texture, depending on the moral purity of the viewers. That's right, a divine guiltometer in creamy form. Some churches claimed to have cloths soaked with Mary's milk. Others had stone altars allegedly turned white when the milk dripped onto them. Pilgrims would kneel, weep, and pay lots for a glimpse. In Tuscany, local lore claimed that farmers who drank water mixed with Mary's milk saw their olive trees flower twice a year. In Belgium, a nun claimed a few drops cured a village from plague, after which the local abbey bottled and sold devotional ampullae embossed with Mary nursing Christ. Liturgies were built around it. Processions marched through towns. In France, priests would anoint childless women with drops of diluted relic milk during special masses. In Germany, entire chorales were composed in honor of the lactation of the Virgin, with lyrics praising her divine nourishment. At the sanctuary of Our Lady of La Leche in Spain, and later in colonial Florida, mothers would pray for lactation, literal miracles of maternal supply, activated by relic-based proximity. The cult grew so powerful that artists began depicting Saint Bernard of Clairvaux receiving a squirt of milk directly from Mary's breast, a scene repeated in frescoes, carvings, and manuscripts for centuries. One legend claimed he gained divine wisdom the moment the milk touched his lips. The image wasn't abstract, it was graphic. One monk even wrote of the milk entering Bernard's mouth, like the beam of a ray of light, but warmer and sweeter. Medieval theology wasn't subtle. It was bodily, vivid, and utterly unapologetic. But how was this milk preserved? Well, that's the sticky part. Most of it was chalk suspension or ground gypsum in holy water. But that didn't stop the faithful. Merchants sold it. Bishops blessed it. The Vatican never officially endorsed the relics, but they also never shut the operation down. Why bite the teat that feeds your cathedrals? One German abbess reportedly baptized babies with it. Divine lactose as sacrament. A Sicilian noblewoman wore a locket with 3 drops around her neck during labor. And in Poland, a shrine kept a milk ampulla beside the Eucharist during Mass to honor the twin sacraments of the body and the nourishment. It doesn't get more literal than that. Pilgrims would travel for weeks just to be near a drop. Some scooped dust from the altars where the milk had once sat, mixing it with wine and ingesting it for healing. In Avignon, a bishop declared that any pilgrim who looked upon Mary's milk on the Feast of the Assumption would gain 3 years' indulgence, and naturally, leave a generous donation. Now imagine it's you. You give birth, nurse your child, and centuries later, that act becomes a holy commodity. Your milk bottled, sold, auctioned, and kissed by nobles and peasants alike. Your bodily fluid turned into spiritual Bitcoin. Your maternity becomes theology. Your secretion becomes salvation. Modern version? Imagine Beyoncé's breast milk being sold in sanctified capsules, available in platinum or economy packs, endorsed by the Vatican TikTok account, celebrities anointing themselves on red carpets, a startup offering blessed booby boxes for your fertility journey. Gwyneth Paltrow markets an NFT version, Lactochain. Apple releases iMilk Plus with haptic lactation alerts. Meanwhile, the Met Gala's dress code becomes Mary and Mammary. And somewhere, a tech priest claims the original silicone pump used is a relic in itself. Absurd? Welcome to medieval theology. Because, in the end, the milk of the Virgin wasn't about motherhood. It was about proximity to divinity. If you couldn't reach heaven, you could at least touch a drop of the divine. And if you couldn't touch it, you could definitely pay for it. If this lactating tale of sanctified absurdity made you rethink spiritual nutrition, hit follow, drop a comment, share it with your weirdest friend, and milk that like button for all it's worth. Tongues of fire, the severed tongues that silence heresy. Hook, what if the church didn't just silence dissent? It literally collected the tongues of the outspoken. Welcome to the world of severed holy tongues, a medieval phenomenon so grotesque and absurd makes Game of Thrones look like a Disney documentary. In an era where the power of the spoken word could spark revolutions, heresies, and entire theological movements, what better way to stop your enemies than to slice out their tongues and then enshrine them as proof of righteousness? Let's begin with the most famous, the tongue of St. Anthony of Padua. After his death in 1231, his body was exhumed 32 years later during the canonization process. His flesh had long turned to dust, except for his tongue, which was fresh, red, and moist, as if it had just delivered a sermon. This was no minor curiosity. It was hailed as a divine endorsement of every word he had ever spoken. The church built a lavish reliquary, gold-plated and encrusted with gems, to display it in the Basilica of St. Anthony. To this day, pilgrims filed past it by the thousands, some leaving notes, others weeping, and many whispering prayers or eloquence, healing, or, ironically, the courage to speak. But Anthony wasn't alone. The tongue of St. John Chrysostom, renowned for his fiery homilies, was reportedly preserved in Constantinople. In Ireland, relics of St. Columbanus were venerated by monks who believed his preserved tongue granted them clarity in Latin. In Eastern Europe, the tongue of St. Paraskiva was passed from bishop to bishop, considered a diplomatic gift. Because what better way to seal a theological alliance than with a rotting piece of divine rhetoric? These relics weren't museum pieces. They were tactile liturgical instruments. In Ravenna, Italy, the tongue of a lesser-known local saint was carried to the streets every Pentecost, swinging in a crystal vial like a celestial metronome. The bishop would anoint the lips of choir boys with blessed oil in front of the relic, a symbolic passing of truthful speech. But where there is speech, there is also suppression. The Church's obsession with the holy word extended to its violent silencing. Many heretics, mystics, and reformers faced not only death, but surgical censorship. Having your tongue removed wasn't just punishment. It was spectacle, a literal erasure of your right to speak. Marguerite Porete, a Beguine mystic whose mystical writings questioned ecclesiastical hierarchy, was condemned and burned in 1310. Chroniclers say her tongue was nailed to her jaw before execution, a brutal metaphor for silencing dissent. Whether literal or hagiographical exaggeration, the imagery stuck. Silence became sanctified. In 14th century France, the tongueless monk of Tours, who dared to denounce a bishop's corruption, had his tongue cut out and was paraded through town. Ironically, pilgrims later came to touch the remains of his mutilated body, claiming the suffering tongue healed stuttering children. In Bohemia, visionary Katerina of Brno, accused of channeling false revelations, was sentenced to silence by red-hot tongs. Her tongue was reportedly buried beneath the pulpit as a warning to future dissenters. In Spain, a rumored relic, a tongue of the last preacher of Granada, was kept in a Jesuit monastery, said of uttered prophetic words before being silenced by invaders. Pilgrims believed that praying in its presence before public speaking could banish fear. In some cases, the relic was dipped in holy water, and the liquid given to orators like a divine lozenge of courage. In Rome, chapels displayed reliquaries shaped like open mouths or tongues of flame. Some were carved in ivory, others in translucent wax. On feast days, they were lit from below, creating a ghastly glow that simulated speech from beyond the grave. In Avignon, a reliquary of a bishop's tongue was placed on the altar during debates to oversee orthodoxy. Because what's a good theological debate without the preserved tissue of a long-dead debater watching? Tongues weren't just body parts. They were symbols of truth, authority, and fear. In medieval universities, professors invoked St. Anthony's incorrupt tongue to end student rebellions. Speak like him, or be forgotten, was one threat recorded in a Parisian lecture log. Now imagine it's you. You deliver a sermon, write a poem, or spark a movement. The crowd cheers, but the church frowns. You're arrested, tried, and sentenced. As the flames rise or the executioner sharpens his knife, your voice is cut, and centuries later, your severed tongue is locked in a glass case, venerated by those who have no idea what you actually said. Fast forward today. Imagine Greta Thunberg's vocal cords encased in acrylic, exhibited in 5 climate museums. One ends up in Elon Musk's Martian chapel. TikTok influencers lip-sync to her sacred frequencies while wearing incense-infused AirPods. An AI clone called Gret AI gives weekly sermons on global warming. Apple releases the iThroat, an AI-assisted voice box marketed as a relic of righteous indignation. Meanwhile, conspiracy theorists claim the original cords were replaced by Vatican-approved clones. Absurd? Welcome to the medieval relic economy. Because back then, to speak was to risk your soul, and to silence was to sanctify. The tongue was both weapon and wound. And if it couldn't be silenced in life, it would be embalmed in death, a forever mute, screaming saint. If this tongue-in-cheek journey through divine censorship left you speechless, subscribe, comment, tag a blasphemer, and don't forget to give you the holy kiss of approval. The nails that held a god and united kingdoms. Hook, what the spikes that pierced Jesus' flesh also pinned together entire empires? Before the splinters of the true cross or the tears of saints, there are the holy nails, jagged, rusted iron spikes allegedly used to crucify Jesus Christ. And in a medieval world obsessed with sacred objects and imperial legitimacy, few relics were more politically loaded or more suspiciously numerous. How many nails were used to crucify Jesus? Depends on who you asked. Some said 3, others insisted on 4. Yet medieval Europe managed to unearth, distribute, and sanctify over 30 nails, each one miraculously tied to the Passion. How? A mix of theological creativity, holy branding, and a little forgery never hurt. Church apologists claim many were simply filings or contact relics, nails that touched the real ones and absorbed their sacred energy. Spiritual franchise by proximity. From Rome to Aachen, Constantinople to Prague, every cathedral worth its incense needed a nail. They weren't just tokens of faith. They were weapons of legitimacy, banners of divine endorsement, political bargaining chips. The most legendary relic was the Iron Crown of Lombardy, a coronation crown forged, allegedly, with one of the holy nails. From Charlemagne to Napoleon, rulers pressed it onto their brows, believing the blood of Christ sanctified their rule. During the ritual, bishops anointed the crown with chrism while reciting verses from Isaiah, evoking both the suffering servant and the unquestionable monarch. The crown didn't just sit, it pierced, and in doing so, it consecrated. In Constantinople, Byzantine emperors boasted 2 nails embedded in gold and crystal. On Palm Sunday, the relics were processed through the capital with liturgical drama, acolytes waving palm branches, choirs chanting in 10-part harmony. Crowds pressed shoulder to shoulder as soldiers held the relics aloft like weapons of celestial war. The sick were brought forward, hoping for healing. The political class bowed, not just to God, but to the emperor who claimed him. Charlemagne went full relic diplomat. He dispersed nails to reinforce his spiritual influence, one to try to stabilize Germanic territories, one to Reims to anchor the French episcopate, and one to Venice to secure papal maritime allegiance. Every transfer came with spectacle. Street theater, Eucharistic adoration, feasting, and the sudden appearance of miracles. Of course, miracles were everywhere. In Hungary, a nail reportedly rang like a bell before Mongol raids. In Poland, another globe blew during plague outbreaks. In Cologne, a sick child touched a nail fragment and began preaching spontaneous Latin, a tongue no one claimed he knew. At the Battle of Bouvines, a relic sewn into the French banner was said to make enemy arrows veer left, as if deflected by divine will. And then there were the fakes. In Avignon, a bishop was caught passing off a blacksmith's iron as a holy nail, only discovered when it left burn marks on the altar linen. In Genoa, a relic seller claimed his nails sang Gregorian chant at night. People flocked. The church investigated. Turned out it was a monk with a flute hiding under the reliquary. Still, belief persisted. Viewing a nail could earn you indulgences. 10 years for touching it, 20 for weeping before it, 50 if you brought a friend. Some cathedrals dangled them over altars via pulley, releasing incense clouds to simulate divine descent. In Milan, a relic was kept in a sunlit chamber with mirrors, so the nail appeared to hover, casting long shadows like the hand of God itself. Processions were sensory overload. Drums, torchlight, swinging censers, relics raised high on golden poles. Vendors sold nail-shaped cookies. Children wore tiny crowns. Nobles knelt while peasants stared. One relic, multiple layers of power. Imagine yourself. A young monarch steps toward the altar. He kneels. The bishop raises the iron crown. He prays. The crown is placed. Beneath the velvet, a nail's tip grazes a scalp. A reminder that leadership is both burden and crucifixion. And just like that, blood meets blood, and thrones are nailed into history. Fast forward to today. A president is inaugurated with a democracy ring housing a Lincoln molar and a melted shard from the Berlin Wall. Live streamed on every screen, blessed by a neural AI pope. Amazon sells replicas. Meta unveils a Nail VR experience. Feel the crucifixion in 8D. Elon Musk implants a relic chip called DivinOS. Divine legitimacy meets blockchain. Influencers wear holy spike earrings. Vatican City launches a perfume. Crux number 3, smell the sanctity. Because in the medieval world, the holy nail wasn't just a relic. It was a seal of power, a relic you could bleed under, and a symbol you could never question. Nail it to your altar, your battlefield, your crown. If this crucifixion-era power play hit the nail on the head, follow the channel, comment, tag your emperor, and hammer that button like you're reforging the crown of the faithful. The skulls of saints, craniums that commanded armies. Hook, what if the key to military victory wasn't a sword, but a skull? In medieval Europe, when kingdoms faced war, plague, or political chaos, they didn't just pray, they reached the craniums of the dead, specifically the skulls of saints. These weren't passive relics hidden in chapel corners. They were paraded, kissed, blessed, and placed on battlefield altars. In some cases, they were believed to command armies and sieges, detect betrayal, and even punish traitors from beyond the grave. Let's begin with the most controversial, the skull of St. John the Baptist, or rather, skulls. Several cities claimed the honor: Amiens, Rome, Damascus, Antioch, Munich, and even a monastery in Montenegro. Rivalries erupted over pilgrimages, offerings, and prestige. Processions turned competitive. Clerics wrote treatises. Popes refused to pick sides. In Amiens, the skull was set in a bejeweled reliquary and paraded during plague outbreaks. In Damascus, it was kept in the Umayyad Mosque, where Christians and Muslims alike venerated it for protection against drought. In Rome, pilgrims reported that the skull would hum softly during Mass, a celestial endorsement of the liturgy. In Hungary, the skull of St. Stephen, first king and national saint, was no mere relic. It was a tactical advisor. During invasions, it was placed atop spears on castle ramparts. Royal commanders fasted before touching it, believing it would whisper divine strategy in dreams. One chronicle claims it wept blood before a major Mongol incursion. Entire armies knelt before it, swearing oaths. Another account described how the skull was once mounted on a gilded war chariot, leading troops into battle while trumpeters blew psalms. In Brittany, the skull of St. Eve, patron of lawyers, was marched through disputed farmland and droughts and terrified tax collectors. One nobleman mocked the practice and allegedly died choking on a communion wafer days later. A monk recorded, "The Holy Skull does not forgive sarcasm." Some relics acted as omens. In Milan, generals consulted the skull of St. Ambrose before battle. If it sweated, the campaign was delayed. In Seville, a bishop's skull rattled in its case if political betrayal loomed. During a 14th century civil war, it reportedly shattered its own reliquary during Mass. Interpreted as a divine hell no, troops refused to advance until the relic was appeased. In Cologne, a cracked saint skull reportedly emitted a scent of violets during invasions, a phenomenon recorded by 3 different abbots. The skulls were adored like monarchs, cleaned weekly with rose water, wrapped in silk, set in gold and sapphire busts with jeweled eyes, ivory teeth, and halos. In Prague, relic bearers wore gloves stitched with verses from Psalms. In Venice, a skull was set on a wheeled cart and rolled through the streets during floods, believed to part water like a saintly Moses. Children sang hymns. Nobles wept. One woman claimed her infertility was cured after gazing into the skull's sockets for 9 minutes. A Parisian noble funded an entire chapel after vision, in which the skull told him to redeem your lineage or choke on legacy. These crania weren't relics. They were talismanic artillery, mobile, symbolic, and politically explosive. Some skulls even traveled across borders. During the 100 Years' War, English troops allegedly smuggled a relic from Rouen back to London. The French accused them of relic piracy. The Pope intervened. A treaty clause was written to return one golden bust containing the sacred head fragment, lest the curse of desecration fall on both armies. In Bohemia, a skull was reportedly traded for 200 barrels of grain and 2 falcons. Monks documented the exchange in verse. Now, picture yourself, a foot soldier freezing in the mud. The battle seems lost. Then, horns blare, bishops emerge, robes billowing. A velvet-wrapped relic is raised. The golden face gleams in firelight. You drop to your knees. You believe again. A dead head is now your commanding officer. Fast forward to today. NATO generals consult a crystal-encased Einstein skull before missile launches. DARPA builds an AI assistant shaped like Churchill's forehead. Twitch streams live decision-making from Patton's cloned cerebellum. TikTokers wear skull caps, smart helmets that whisper motivational psalms. Elon Musk auctions the first neuro-mummified martyr head, retrieved from a SpaceX chapel in lunar orbit. Vatican VR unveils Saints of Strategy, letting gamers unlock tactical relics for digital crusades. Absurd? Medieval people thought it was completely rational, because in medieval Europe, belief wasn't metaphorical. It was anatomical. Sanctity wasn't poetic. It was bone deep. If this tale of bone-based warfare cracked your cranium, follow the channel, comment with your favorite relic, share it with your battle squad, and headbutt that like button in the name of holy strategy. Bloodlines of the divine, the scandals of the holy umbilical cords. Hook, What if salvation was tied off with a knot and stored in gold? Move over, skulls and splinters. Medieval Europe also obsessed over umbilical cords. Not just any cord, but the actual umbilical cord of Jesus Christ, and in some cases, the Virgin Mary's too. These sacred leftovers weren't relics of martyrdom or miracle. They were relics of biology, and they stirred up more scandals than any saint's halo ever did. Several monasteries and cathedrals claimed to own the holy navel string. The most famous was in Chartres, France, where the relic was housed in a crystal vial and paraded during royal processions. Pilgrims came from across Europe to kneel before the dried, knotted string. On feast days, monks would carry it through candlelit streets while chanting lullabies in Latin. At least 2 French kings attributed the health of their heirs to prayers before the relic. Children were brought forward to touch the vial, hoping to absorb cordial blessings, the literal term used in certain manuscripts. Local bakers even made cord-shaped bread as votive offerings. Other sites soon joined the umbilical arms race: Bruges, Siena, Zaragoza, Cologne, Toledo, and even Canterbury. No 2 cords looked alike. Some resembled silkworm threads. Others looked suspiciously like braided horsehair, linen fibers, or shredded veal tripe. That didn't stop the miracles. One relic glowed during Advent. Another wept during a famine. A third was said to pulse faintly when touched by virgins. In Zaragoza, the cord was briefly stolen by a rival monastery, then miraculously returned after an outbreak of boils struck the thieves. In Siena, the cord was dipped in holy water used to bless vineyards, resulting in a wine harvest blessed by the womb. In Bruges, it was stored in a rotating reliquary dome that mirrored the zodiac. Theologians debated, how could a bodily relic from Jesus remain on earth if his body ascended fully to heaven? One school claimed the cord attached before ascension, therefore free to stay. Others argued it multiplied by divine will, a metaphysical version of mitosis. A third, more esoteric branch claimed each strand of the cord represented a different gospel truth. Entire treatises were written. Monks debated in cloisters. Bishops argued during councils. At one synod, a bishop reportedly slapped another across the face with a silk pouch containing his cathedral's prized cord of incarnation. One chronicler simply titled the incident "The Knotting of Wrath." At the University of Paris, theology students were required to write essays comparing the cord to the Eucharist. Meanwhile, relic merchants did brisk business selling contact cords, strings that had touched the original. The slogan by 3, "Get a miracle free," wasn't satire. Papal indulgences were granted for donations toward cord reliquaries. Fake cords even came with authenticity scrolls, bearing wax seals and weeping cherubs. In Paris, a black market relic dealer named Brother Otto was caught selling navel cords made of dried eel skin. His punishment? Public shaving and exile to a monastery famous for its silence. In Cologne, a forger was forced to clean cathedral latrines for 7 years, so his soul might be unknotted. The scandals were biblical, and then some. In Avignon, a bishop was excommunicated after forging an umbilical cord from mummified lamb intestine and attempting to sell it to a Spanish queen. In Florence, a priest auctioned a relic to pay off gambling debts at a monastery dice game. In Rome, 2 rival basilicas claimed to have the final knot, leading processions marching in opposite directions around the same square, ending in a theological riot known as the Cord conflict. At least 3 friars were injured by thuribles. One priest reportedly screamed, "Unknot your pride, heretic," before fainting from incense fumes. An entire opera was later composed about the conflict, banned in 5 dioceses. These relics had real-world uses. During childbirth, women would wear replicas around their waist for protection. Nobles paid fortunes for a blessing with the original. Midwives carried tiny versions sewn into their aprons. Some were boiled into tea. Others placed under pillows to inspire holy dreams. In London, a cord fragment was placed in the bridal bed of a queen to ensure royal conception. One manuscript describes a childless queen who drank cord-infused wine. She conceived twins and named them Benedict and Corda. Her tombstone featured an engraved image of a coiled rope hovering over her womb. In a 14th century medical manual, the cord was suggested as a remedy for nosebleeds, melancholy, and excessive poetry. Now imagine yourself. You're a desperate pilgrim, kneeling before a glass case containing a wiry little coil. Monks chant. Incense rises. You whisper your hopes into it. You believe that scrap of dried tissue once tethered God to the womb of the world. And in that moment, you're not just touching faith. You're holding the knot that tied heaven to earth. Fast forward to today. A biotech startup launches NeoCord, a wearable DNA charm reverse engineered from ancient relic proteins. Influencers post cord blessed fertility dance challenges. Gwyneth Paltrow sells Holy Bond, incense made from lab-grown spiritual tissue. Catholic NFT startups offer digital relic scans, complete with blockchain-confirmed blessings. NASA discovers a braid-like anomaly on Mars. Reddit calls it the original divine cord. Elon Musk tweets, just got mine implanted, feeling more incarnate than ever. Meanwhile, Amazon unveils Cord Prime, relic shipping in under 12 hours. Netflix greenlights a documentary called Holy DNA, The Womb Files. At Davos, world leaders wear cord-shaped lapel pins said to bring geo-spiritual equilibrium. Because in the relic economy, even what falls off at birth can be reborn as power. If this sacred scandal made your belly button tingle, follow the channel, comment with your weirdest relic theory, share it with your miracle hunting crew, and cordially smash that like button for divine connections.